Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Combat Chronicles, and today we are going to be discussing the fight night that is on this Sunday morning. And this fight night is being headlined by Max Holloway and Chan Sung Jung, the Korean zombie, and this is going to be a very exciting fight. Some of the other fights on this card are quite excellent as well. So we are going to be discussing 3 fights in total, which are the last 3 fights on the card. So let's start with the first one, which is between Giga Chikadze and Alex Caceres, both of whom are excellent featherweight fighters and are likely to be contenders, especially in the case of Alex Caceres following this particular fight. Now, if you are a fan of striking, then you know both of these names. You know Giga Chikadze very, very well because he is an excellent kickboxer. He has some of the strongest, crispest, most technical kicks that I have seen in the UFC, and he is an excellent striker as well, although he does not do very well at close range, so that is something that is lacking in his game. On the other hand, Alex Caceres, also known as Bruce Leroy, is an excellent long striker as well. So this is a very interesting matchup between two good strikers who bring slightly different styles to the table, but will mostly be fighting this fight on the feet instead of taking it to the ground. So this is going to be one of the fan favorite fights of this particular card. If we go into the tail of the tape, now Giga Chikadze is coming back from injury and he has not fought for a while, so his record does reflect that, because he has a record of 14 wins, 3 losses and 0 draws or no contests, against Alex Caceres' record of 21 wins, 13 losses and 0 draws, 1 no contest. If you look at their average fight times, they're pretty close. So Chikadze has an average fight time of 12 minutes 52 seconds against Alex Caceres' average fight time of 11:49. Height wise, they're pretty close. Chikadze is 2 inches taller, he stands 6 feet tall. So Bruce Leroy, who is used to bringing a height advantage into his featherweight fights, is not going to have that particular advantage against Giga. Now, Giga also has a 1-inch reach advantage, which is not very significant, so I don't think we should think much about that. If we consider their stances, Giga has an orthodox stance, although he has the ability to switch, which is something that people generally ignore about his fight style, whereas Alex Caceres also switches well, but is predominantly a southpaw. Now, if you look at the striking stats, which is the most important aspect of this fight because both of these fighters are proficient strikers, you see that they are quite evenly matched in quite a few regards. So if you look at the strikes landed per minute, Giga has a 4.05 average against Alex Caceres' 4.16 average. Striking accuracy wise, Giga is slightly behind Alex Caceres, so he has a 42% average against Alex's 51% average. Strikes absorbed per minute wise, Giga absorbs 3.35 strikes per minute and Alex Caceres absorbs 3.87 strikes per minute, so they're not very far off. And striking defense wise, again, they're very evenly matched. Giga has a 62% defense against Bruce Leroy's 63% defense. So they're both excellent strikers, and I'm going to ignore the grappling statistics because I don't really think that's where this fight is going to end up. Although it has to be said that there is a chance that Alex Caceres will want to take this fight to the ground because that is where he might have a slight advantage over Giga, but that will be something that is unlikely to happen, and we can only wait and watch if that actually takes place in the fight. Now, if you look at the last few fights that these people have fought, Alex Caceres won his last fight against Pineda, who is an excellent fighter, and that was a very good fight because it was a back and forth fight for the first few rounds, and then in the last round, Pineda was quite damaged in his torso, so he had taken a lot of body shots and a lot of kicks, because of which he eventually lost the fight, but he managed to finish the fight and not get knocked out, so that is something impressive about Pineda as well, and it was a very tough fight for Alex Caceres. Before that he had a win against Hirosa, before that he had a loss to Yusuf, before that he had 2 wins, one against Choi and the other against Kroom. So before Pineda, Alex Caceres has mostly fought fighters who are not very well known, but he was fighting well-rounded fighters, so that is a good part of his resume. If you look at Giga Chikadze on the other hand, so he had beaten Morales, he then beat Simmons, he then went on to beat Swanson, and then he went on to beat Barboza, which was quite a coup for him, because Barboza is a household name, or at least was one, till he moved up in weight and changed his division. And Barboza is known for his striking. He is known as one of the best strikers to have ever come into the UFC, especially for his wheel kicks and his very strong, very technical, very fast kicking. So beating Barboza was a big thing for Giga Chikadze, and that showed that he had a very high level of striking and kicking to be able to match somebody like Barboza. But after that, he had a loss to Kelvin Cater. So yeah, that is a little blip on his radar, and he has been away since that loss. So it will be interesting to see whether he has a little bit of ring rust, or he can manage the fight as well as he usually does. A few things to keep in mind about their fighting styles before we get into the next fight. Well, number one, like I said, Giga is an excellent striker. He has very fast kicks, and he is very good at using his kicks to manage distance and keep people at a distance, which is where he is at his best. Then Giga is also known for putting out excellent fights, which usually get him a bonus. So he is a very exciting fighter to watch, which is why this is going to be one of the most enjoyable fights to watch on this card. Another thing about Giga is that he has had 5 surgeries while he has been away. So he's been away for a long time, and he hasn't fought since the Cater fight. And in that span, he has had 5 surgeries. So is he now capable of maintaining the same level of physical ability and fighting ability, or have the surgeries changed his physique or the ability that he has to use his body? That is something that we will only come to know in the fight. The one issue with Giga, as I mentioned in the earlier portion of the video, is that he has issues at close range. So whenever somebody is able to close the distance and nullify his kicking in that close range in the phone booth, he has trouble handling people with excellent punches. So he has a little bit of trouble with boxers who come in close, and that is something that Alex Caceres can use, because Alex Caceres has better boxing than Giga as far as you can tell from their previous fights. And Giga also has problems with high level grapplers, because he's not the best grappler. So that is why I said Alex Caceres could take this fight to the ground and have a slight advantage over there if he plans to do that and he can execute that plan well. But what swings in Giga's favor is that he has a lot more power than Alex Caceres, and he has devastating strikes. So especially his kicks can absolutely destroy anybody's body or knock them out if he hits them in the head. So it is, when you're fighting Giga, you have to be very, very careful, because if he manages to touch you with his striking, then you are in trouble, because he will put a lot of damage on you. And of course, because he has devastating power, he has a very high knockdown average, so he is knocking people down and knocking people out very often in his fights. So Alex Caceres will have to be very careful of his power. If you talk about Alex Caceres, he also has excellent striking, and he has very good counters, especially when it comes to his boxing ability. Not that he cannot kick well, he does kick very well, but he doesn't have the same snap, the same speed and the power that Giga Chikadze has. But he has very good boxing, which covers up for that lack. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether Alex Caceres can exercise his boxing abilities more than Giga can exercise his kicking abilities. Technically speaking, it will be easier for Giga to put his kicks on Alex Caceres than it will be for Alex Caceres to put his punches on Giga, because it is easier to land kicks at a distance, and that is something Giga is good at. Alex Caceres also is known for putting on very exciting fights and winning a lot of bonuses. So again, this is one exciting fighter against the other, and that makes for a very, very good fight. And one thing that is absolutely in Alex Caceres' favor in this fight is the fact that he has been fighting regularly, and he has had a lot of fights in the last 6 months or so. So Giga might have a problem because he is not used to fighting consistently and he's been away for a while, whereas Alex Caceres will be far more tuned to being in the octagon and fighting against somebody. Now, the one issue though with Alex Caceres is that he does not close range very well, which is something he will have to do if he wants to exploit Giga's issues with fighting at close range. Because if he stays at a distance with Giga will absolutely destroy him, and he will use his kicks to break Alex Caceres down over the first couple of rounds, and that will be the end of the fight. And another issue with Alex Caceres is that he lacks offensive grappling, which is something that he should have to use against Giga Chikadze. So these are both things that he can use to give himself an advantage against Giga, but looking at his previous fights, he does not have these things in his arsenal. So it'll be interesting to see if he has changed his approach and he has trained more as a grappler or an in-fighter. So that is something that we should look forward to in this fight. And yes, he's not as powerful or technical as Giga, as I mentioned before, but he has the ability to grapple defensively and he can choke fighters out. He has very good chokes. But that is not very applicable here because Giga is not going to be taking him down unless he decides to do something that he usually doesn't do, which will be quite foolish, especially when he's fighting Alex Caceres. My pick for this fight would be Giga Chikadze by a very slight margin, although I think Alex Caceres is going to be far more fluent in this fight and Giga will have to take a little bit of time to get used to fighting again because he's been away for a very long time. Regardless, I think Alex Caceres will have trouble with Giga's power and he will have trouble with the fact that he doesn't have the ability to use all of Giga's disadvantages against him. So yeah, I would go for Giga Chikadze in this fight, but regardless of which side you lean on, this is going to be an excellent fight, so you should be watching it. The next fight on the card is another exciting fight between two light heavyweights. So one is somebody we know very well, that is Anthony Lionheart Smith, who is an excellent, well-rounded fighter, and the other is an up-and-comer whose name is Ryan Superman Spann. And if you haven't been following Ryan Spann, which is possible even if you are an MMA fan, you would know that in the earlier parts of his career he had issues with fitness because he was not working on his fitness very well, so he would tire in fights. But he has a lot of power in his hands and he is a good striker who has now also developed wrestling and grappling skills. So now he is a more well-rounded fighter who brings a lot of cardio into his fights and has the ability to go all 3 or all 5 rounds if he has to. So that is something interesting that we have seen in Ryan Spann's fighting in the last 2 fights that he has fought, as far as I remember. If you look at the tail of the tape, Anthony Smith has a lot more experience. He has 36 wins, 18 losses, 0 draws against Ryan Spann's 21 wins and 8 losses. If you look at the average fight time, again, Anthony Smith spends about 9 minutes 42 seconds per average in every fight in the octagon, whereas Ryan Spann is a pure knockout artist, so he's spending around 4 minutes 34 seconds, which is less than a round. So that should tell you how much power he carries into a fight and how impressive his power is. Now, height-wise, there isn't too much of a difference. Anthony Smith is 6'4", so Ryan Spann is 6'5". Reach-wise though, Ryan Spann has a 3-inch reach advantage, which could be significant, especially considering the fact that Ryan Spann will want to strike with Anthony Lionheart Smith, and that reach advantage might help him hit him more effectively while staying out of Anthony Smith's range. They're both orthodox fighters, so there are no stance openings that are going to come up. If you look at the striking, Anthony Smith has a 2.96 strikes per minute average against Ryan Spann's 3.28. So yeah, in the striking department, Ryan Spann is slightly better in most metrics. But I think Anthony Smith has the ability to match that. The only problem he will have is with managing the power of Ryan Spann because he hits very, very hard. So he could knock Anthony Smith out. And that is quite likely. I think that is what is going to happen in this fight. Grappling wise, Ryan Spann has a 1.64 takedown per 15-minute average against Anthony Smith's 0.48. So even in the grappling department, he has an advantage in initiating takedowns. and his takedown defense is quite similar to Anthony Smith. So Anthony Smith has a 47% defense against Ryan Spann's 45% defense. Now, all of those things considered, you cannot really take out much from this data about the differences between these fighters. So these are a few points to keep in mind when you're watching this fight. So number one, Ryan Spann, like I said, has improved his cardio and his technique. So he now lasts in fights a lot longer, and that is the only issue he was having, and that is what had caused the few losses that he has. And he has explosive power. He is far better tuned to striking and fighting, and he initiates chaos basically. So he can wrestle, he can punch, he can strike, he can stay on the feet as well. But his style is such that he likes to initiate a lot of chaos, and he likes to create these moments where the opponent has to make split-second decisions, and that can be something that can freeze a lot of opponents. It is unlikely that it will freeze Ryan Spann, because it will freeze Anthony Smith, because he is very experienced. But in those kind of fights where everything happens in a split second and the pace is very high and there is a lot of chaos going on and transitions between wrestling, grappling and striking are very, very quick, in those kind of fights Ryan Spann has an advantage because that is his particular style. If you look at Anthony Smith, he has a very conventional style and he has a very conventional stance, although he is quite well rounded. So he has good wrestling, he has good Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well, but his wrestling is not top notch. So if you look at his fight against Glover Teixeira absolutely controlled him in that fight and exercised his wrestling abilities on Anthony Smith. So it is not like he is the best of the best in the wrestling department. So there is a possibility that Ryan Spann could out wrestle him. So that is something we will have to wait and watch out for. The advantages that Anthony Smith brings to the fight though are that he is highly experienced and he has fought a lot of high level fighters. He has fought people like John Jones, like Glover Teixeira, and he's fought the best of the best in the light heavyweight division. So he does have that experience behind him, and if he has managed to make it through those fights regardless of whether he won them or lost them, then it gives him a better chance of dealing with Ryan Spann as well. And he has a mental edge from the first fight because both of them have already fought once, and Anthony Smith did beat Ryan Spann in that fight. So it'll be interesting to see how Ryan Spann deals with that psychological disadvantage. Now my pick is Ryan Spann. I think he will win by knockout and he will knock Anthony Smith out cold. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't think I can add too much to it. Now we get to the most important and the most highly anticipated fight of this card, which is between the legend Max Blessed Holloway, who is widely considered one of the best featherweights of all time, and he's going up against one of the most exciting featherweight fighters of all time, who is probably the biggest fan favorite in the featherweight division today, which is the Korean Zombie. And I have done a video on the Korean Zombie before, so if you watched that video, you would probably know that the Korean Zombie has that name because he is literally a zombie from Korea who marches forward, who has a lot of power, who is quite technical as well, so he's not devoid of technique either, and he tries to hit people to absolutely knock their spark out, which is something that he can do because he has a lot of power in his hands. Max Holloway, on the other hand, is a volume fighter. And if you have watched Max Holloway fights, if you're an MMA fan, you must have. You know that he starts at a very high pace in the first and the second round, and that slowly his pace keeps going higher, and he puts out so many strikes that he completely overwhelms his opponents. A good example of that is his fight against Calvin Kattar, where he absolutely outboxed and outstruck Calvin Kattar and completely destroyed him physically, to the point where Dana White was sitting outside the octagon and he told all of his staff that Calvin Kattar is badly damaged. You are not going to interview him. You are not going to leave him in the octagon till the post-fight interviews are done. You're going to take him to the hospital immediately and you're going to make sure that he is okay, because he literally thought that Calvin Kattar might die right after the fight, and that is the amount of damage Max Holloway put on him in that fight. So you can imagine what he is capable of. If you look at the tail of the tape, now Holloway has an extensive record. He has 24 wins, 7 losses against Korean Zombie, 17 wins and 7 losses. Both of them have spent quite a significant amount of time in the octagon and have an average of 16 minutes 8 seconds in Holloway's case and 12 minutes 29 seconds in the Zombies case. So yeah, they match themselves up very, very well. It is not like there is a huge difference in their experience and abilities. But Max Holloway has a height advantage. He is 5'11 and the Zombie is 5'7. But ironically, the Zombie has a 3-inch reach advantage with a 72-inch reach against Holloway's 69-inch reach. Both of them are orthodox fighters, so there are no stance issues there, although Max Holloway has the ability to switch stances quite well. But yeah, that is not a mainstay of this fight. The mainstay of this fight is both of these people like to point to the ground in front of them, stand there and start hitting each other and not back down. So this is going to be one of the most exciting fights of this year as far as I can tell. Now this is where it gets interesting. In the striking department, Max Holloway has an insane strikes landed per minute average of 7.16, which is maddening. So he is landing more than 1 strike per 10 seconds in every fight, which is insane. And you can imagine that if that is his average, there must be times when he is landing 8, 9, 10, 12 strikes per minute as well. So just imagine that. The Korean Zombie, on the other hand, has roughly a 4 strikes landed per minute average, which is not comparable, but you have to consider the fact that the Zombie lands with a lot more power and he's a lot more considerate with his shots. He also waits for counters, which is not a good idea around Max Holloway, because even though Max Holloway takes a lot of hits because of his high output, he is quite evasive as well. So you can't just sit around and wait for Max Holloway to come to you and let him hit you. Striking accuracy wise, Holloway has a 47% accuracy, which is impressive considering how much he outstrikes people and the volume that he puts out, against the Zombie's 42% average. Strikes absorbed per minute wise, they're pretty close. So Max Holloway absorbs 4.79 strikes per minute and the Zombie absorbs 4.35 strikes per minute, although the reasons for that are very different. Holloway absorbs a lot of strikes because he puts out a lot of strikes, so he's in range very often, whereas the Zombie absorbs a lot of strikes because he lets you come to him and he waits so that he can hit you with that one shot that will take your head off. So that is the difference between them. And striking defense wise, Max Holloway has a good striking defense of 59% against the Zombie's 52%. I don't think this fight is going to go to the ground, although Max Holloway could take it to the ground and try and take advantage of that, and it could swing either way. But Max Holloway has a very high takedown defense of 84%, while the Zombie has a 72% defense, so he is pretty good at defending takedowns as well. So practically speaking, either one of them should be trying to take this fight to the ground. They should probably just keep it on the feet, which will be good for us as well as fans, because that is the most exciting part of this fight. Now, a few things to consider when you're watching this fight are, specifically in Holloway's case first. So he, like I said, he's likely to set a very high pace, and his pace will, if you watch the first round, you will think, oh, he's putting out so many strikes, he's hitting the Zombie so much. But you will realize that he will one-up himself in the second round and then go beyond that in the third and then go beyond that in the fourth. So he will continuously ramp up his rate of strikes per round. And he will show his ability to put out a very high volume of strikes. Now, his volume and intensity will increase round by round, and that will have a cumulative effect on his opponent, because he usually puts out so much damage on them that over the rounds it completely incapacitates them. And like I said before, the Cater fight is a good example of that. You see all of this in that particular fight. The issue with Max Holloway though is that he absorbs a lot of strikes as well, and he has good defense, so he moves with those strikes and they are mostly glancing strikes, but cumulatively, because he is always in range and he is always trying to hit the opponent, he also does take a lot of strikes, which is an issue when you're fighting the Korean Zombie, because with other fighters you can take 1, 2, 3 strikes and land 4, 5, 7 strikes and have an advantage, but with the Zombie you might land 6 or 7 strikes, but when the Zombie lands 1 strike on you, he will knock you out. So you have to think about that when you're approaching the Korean Zombie. And Another issue with Max Holloway is that his rhythm and his flow can be broken by somebody like Alexander Volkanovski, who in their last fight completely disrupted Max Holloway's rhythm, and then with his speed used that advantage to beat on Max Holloway and completely show him up. So that is something that could happen in this fight, although the zombie does not have the style that would facilitate interrupting Max Holloway's rhythm. So that is something to keep in mind. The one thing about his grappling though is that he has very good guillotines, and that could be something that he could use in this fight, especially if the zombie decides to try and take him down, which is unlikely but could happen. And like I said before, he has an 84% takedown defense, so it is unlikely that anybody is taking anybody down in this fight. If you look at the Korean zombie, he is a fan favorite. Everybody loves him because he embodies the moniker of being a zombie, and he literally fights like a crazy zombie. And he has very heavy hands, so he has immense power in his hands, and he can knock anybody out in the featherweight division. So Holloway will have to make sure that he doesn't absorb as many strikes as he usually does in his fights. Another thing about the zombie, which is why he is called the zombie, is because he has an amazing chin and he is very durable. So you can literally punch the zombie for 5 rounds and he will take all of those punches and not get knocked out. And that is a feature of his fighting style that is quite impressive. The only time that I remember the zombie getting knocked out clean was in his fight against Yair Rodriguez, where Yair Rodriguez brought that very unconventional backward elbow and just caught the zombies. That is the only time I've seen him knocked out cold. Otherwise, you are not knocking the zombie out. So, yeah, in any case, Max Holloway is known for his volume and not his knockouts. So, he will have to use that volume against the zombie and try and win this fight on points. If you look at the zombie's fight against Leonard Garcia, the first fight against Leonard Garcia, you saw how wild the zombie is in his fights and how wild he is in his striking. But then in his second fight against Leonard Garcia, the zombie showed that he has great grappling as well, and he beat Leonard Garcia by a twister submission, which is very rare because that was probably the second twister submission that ever happened in the UFC, and I think since then there's only been one more, if there has been one more. So it was a very unique submission that the zombie managed to pull off, and he has submission skills in his resume. The thing is, he does not use them very often, he doesn't grapple very often. So it'll be interesting to see if he decides to bring that to the table in this fight. Now, Zombie has a very front foot heavy fighting style, so he's all constantly moving forward and he looks for counters. So he has a lower output, but he is looking to let the opponent try and hit him and overextend, and he will take one shot to land one shot because his shots are a lot more powerful. Another thing about the Zombie is that he tries to close range, but in a very unique way, because he tries to let the opponent hit him just so he can get into close range and then have an advantage and try and hit him back. So if you're fighting the Zombie as Max Holloway, you want to be careful about him closing in the range, because you might be hitting him and you might think that is a good thing, but while you're hitting him, the Zombie is getting closer to you. So you do not want that. This fight is actually a little bit like a horror movie. You have to make sure that the Zombie doesn't get too close to you, otherwise he bites you and you're done. Anyway, another thing about the Zombie is that he can have problems with movement fighters, which will probably be an issue in this fight because Max Holloway has excellent movement, although he does not move out of the pocket as often. He tries to stay in range a lot more than most movement fighters. So whether he will make that adjustment and bring up his defense, striking defense, is something that I want to see in this fight. And the last thing about the Korean Zombie is that he has the power advantage over Max Holloway. So Holloway has to be careful of that, because even if he's winning the fight on points and he has won all 4 rounds, the Zombie could knock him out in the last round, and that wouldn't surprise anybody at all. So regardless of what juncture he is at in the fight, Max Holloway has to be careful of the Zombie striking and his power. Now my pick for this fight is Max Holloway, because we have seen him put out a lot of volume and handle powerful punches before, but Yeah, I'm very excited about this fight, and I'm not saying that there is no chance for the zombie to win, because he can win. He is excellent in wild fights, and Max Holloway does have that streak where when he is fighting a game fighter, then he does stand in the pocket and just throw caution to the wind, which is something that the zombie loves. And Max Holloway is also amiable to that. So this could be one of the wildest fights this year, and this is definitely going to be the best fight on this card. So you should definitely catch it. Anyway, that is my piece. I hope you enjoyed the analysis. Please let me know what you think about these fights and this card, and I will see you next time with another breakdown of the next UFC event. Thank you.